Radio 5 Live.
With Stephen Nolan.
Right, time to look at the papers tonight. It's with the former Conservative MP Edwina Currie. Hello, Edwina.
Hello again.
It's lovely to talk to you. The broadcaster Sonia Poulton. Hello, Sonia.
Hello, Stephen.
Don't be taking any nonsense from her now. Do you hear me, Sonia?
Of course not.
Definitely not. Right, where are we going to start? Edwina, you can choose.
Well, the main stuff that's all over the front pages that lifts my heart in many ways is about Ukraine and the pictures of Yulia Tymoshenko, Ukraine's Iron Lady. She's on the front of the Observer. She's on the front of all the main broadsheets, the Sunday Telegraph, Sunday Times, and so on. My fear, my worry about what's going on in Ukraine, which I've been watching glued to the box all day, is that this could be a rerun of perhaps 1968, when the tanks rolled in. I don't think Russia would do anything like that while the Sochi Olympics are still on, but perhaps when, all the journalists have gone home from Sochi and attention's turning elsewhere. Look, it's possible. The Polish foreign minister said to the opposition leaders earlier in this week, you have to accept the deal, because if you don't, there's going to be martial law. I have it on good authority that the army is ready and you will all be dead. And Polish foreign minister knows what he's talking about, because that's what happened in his own country in previous generations. On the other hand, it could be 1989 again, when the Berlin Wall came down. Wonderful. It could be the start of a new era for Ukraine, and I certainly hope it is.
Sonia?
Well, I hope it's the start of a new era for the Ukraine, I have to say, because it's just been absolutely horrendous to watch. I mean, this week when we saw, what was the start of clearly appeared to be a revolution, but to see all the people killed, absolutely horrible, awful, heart-wrenching. But unfortunately, inevitably, that is going to take place when you have a president who's quite prepared to turn snipers on its own people. So that was pretty horrendous. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, for me, the jury's out. I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm very concerned about the fact that Obama is apparently speaking with Putin, having constructive talks on Ukraine. Not quite sure what America can offer to this. Frankly, generally nothing but a bloodbath. It's really interesting to see Yulia Tymoshenko released. She was imprisoned on spurious charges. She should have never been there in the first place. Completely politically motivated, her imprisonment. But whether she's going to be the saviour of the peace is quite something else. As I say, Stephen, for me, the jury is still very much out. I would love to see it, be something akin to the fall of the Berlin Wall. But at this moment in time, I have no idea which way it's going to fall.
What will the Russians be doing now, Sonia?
Well, the thing is, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? I think the problem is that really what we're dealing with a massive global agenda. We keep pinpointing these individual areas of the world and saying, this is taking place, and this, Libya or Egypt or wherever they're going to be overthrowing it. But the truth is that we are still dealing with this, as I say, a mass global agenda where, they are heading towards something akin to a one world government. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, there is a lot of doubt about it.
Oh, really? In what respect, Edwina?
Well, because there are lots and lots of government. When back in the 70s, early 70s, in the United Nations, there were only 16 democracies. And then you could talk about the Cold War, and you could talk about battles for global domination like that. I think these days, particularly with the development of democracy throughout many other parts of the world, with the free media that we have in many parts of the world now, I don't think it would be true to say that anyone's heading for one government. The Ukrainians might well feel like that with the Russians breathing down. But on the other hand, what might happen is that the country splits. A velvet revolution. Now, that would be good.
Well, the first thing I'd like to take issue with is the idea that we have a free media, because that to me is something...
But we're not talking on a free medium right now?
Well, you and I are at this moment in time, but we're looking from newspapers where it's very selective news. So it's not quite correct to say it's free media. We know
lots of newspapers,
but we know for a fact that the media is almost frequently complicit with what the government wants. We know that, quite clearly. Otherwise,
are you being told what to say?
No, I'm talking about the newspapers at this moment. I'm a freelancer. I say exactly what I want
blog,
to.
You do all sorts of things.
No, I don't blog actually. But that's me. But you're talking.
You write for the Daily Mail. I saw one.
I used to. But you're talking about a free media in general, aren't you? And I'm saying, no, I completely disagree with that. We don't have a free media, and I think it's a fallacy to suggest we do. So I definitely do believe that we are heading for a one world government, and all the signs are there to say that we are. I mean, for goodness sake, what on earth is President Obama getting involved in the Ukraine for exactly?
Well, why not? Lots of Ukrainians live in the United States.
Yeah, but you know, the thing is, I think it's quite outrageous because Obama, like Cameron, they think that it's their prerogative to march all over various territories and tell people what to do. It's about
I think it's their job to make whatever effort they can to bring peace to people and to give them the opportunity of free determination and choosing their own governments.
I think it's a hilarious suggestion to suggest that either Obama or Cameron are capable of giving liberty to anybody. And what they should do is look at their own back gardens and see what a filthy mess they've created there.
I'll leave that hanging, shall I?
Well, I want to
agree with a word of that.
I want to let you listen to what the Times columnist Matthew Parris said on tonight's programme. He said the UK should not interfere in what is happening in Ukraine.
We're not getting a nearly sufficiently complete view of the situation. I think we're way out of our depth when trying to work out what's really going on here. This is the easy point. Nasty, brutal Soviet puppet leader, boo, brave protesters in favour of democracy. Hooray, we're all on the side of the protesters. Well, I suppose I am, but do I really know enough about Ukrainian politics? Do we in Britain know enough about Ukrainian politics? Do we understand the complexities? Do we understand the history? Do we know about the differences of allegiance and opinion across the country from east to west to wade in any way? And I don't think we can. And I think if we try to, we've got to be prepared to put our money where our mouths are. At the moment, the Ukraine has to some extent been on the umbilical cord of Mother Russia. If the EU is going to assume responsibility, well, remember, it is a vast country without many natural resources. It's extremely poor. Bulgaria, Romania are tiny by comparison, with lots of people trying to get out, trying to emigrate. Can the European Union really bite off and digest this? I rather doubt it.
Edwina?
I was just looking at to see what William Hague has been saying about this. I've got a lot of sympathy with Matthew's point of view, although, of course, it would always lead us then to stand back from almost any international situation. But William Hague has been talking today with the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier, who I think was at the the meetings earlier this week, and also with Radek Sikorski. What they're agreeing is that the international community, and Hague mentions the IMF, so not just the European Union, but the much larger global financial community, will need to put together a financial package in order to help with future stability in Ukraine. Now, that seems to me exactly the sort of thing that the Western nations, the wealthy Western nations, ought to be actively considering and able to put in place if a new government is elected on May the 25th.
I mean, I find it so interesting that, again, I tend to agree with Matthew Parris on this, and that is we don't know enough. And one of the reasons we don't know enough is because we get this second-hand view of what's actually taking place. And again, William Hague sticking his nose into another country that, you know, why aren't we taking care of the fact that our own country is in need of stabilising? You know, that there are people who are...
Well, we do that as well.
Well,
they're not alternatives. You have some responsibility overseas as well.
We do have a responsibility overseas, of course we do, but the truth is that our coalition as it stands, and previous government force, so this is not a party political broadcaster, completely negligent for some of the people of the UK. You know, you only have to look at the problems we have here, whether it's to do with the issues of welfare or food banks, or the fact that the NHS is now 49% privatised. But we're so busy deflecting all the problems onto other countries, whichever country it is, whether it's Syria, whether it's the Ukraine. And I just, you know, I tend to think that we know so very little about what's really taking place. But it's so easy for us all to rush in and say, you know, as Matthew said, oh, the protesters, yay, you know, the president's boo. But, you know, what is really the truth of the matter? But,
well,
you know.
Well, let's speak to William B. Taylor, who served as an American ambassador to Ukraine from 2006 until 2009, now with the US Institute of Peace. William, good evening.
Yes. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. What's your assessment of where this goes next, William? What do you see happening next?
Well, I think it's very interesting that the Ukrainians have taken these steps themselves, clearly with the support of the European foreign ministers. But the Ukrainians deserve the credit for putting in place and taking control of their government. So I see them consolidating the gains that they've made, the steps that they've taken, the revised constitution, going back to the earlier constitution, which puts more power in the parliament. I think those steps are important. And that will lead then to early elections, and they will be able to choose their leaders. But again, the Ukrainians deserve a lot of credit for sticking to their principles and being as disciplined as they were.
Is there any way back for the president?
I think there's no way back for Viktor Yanukovych. I think he has totally lost the ability to govern.
So what will happen to him?
It's a good question. If he has indeed been removed from the presidency by the parliament, I would imagine that there are vacant dachas in Moscow or Minsk or maybe other places around the world where he could probably be welcome.
And obviously, William, the Americans will be taking this seriously, but how much real effect can the Americans actually have? How much influence can they have?
Well, there is, of course, some influence that the Americans can have. Like there's a lot of influence that the Europeans can have. But this is not a decision or a matter of U.S. influence or European influence or even Russian influence, for that matter. I go back to the conclusion that I have come to, which is this is Ukrainians asserting their sovereignty and asserting their interest in a democratic version of their government. So I think this is the Ukrainian influence, not the Russian, American, or even European.
Edwina?
It was very interesting listening to William, and I think his views are really very worthwhile. One of the things I think made a difference in the last year or so has been Vitaly Klitschko's changing his mind from fighting again to be a world heavyweight boxing champion. In other words, an international figure, one of renown, and one who's known for being dignified and responsible, and him getting involved as one of the leading opposition figures. There's a feeling that something had to happen, that the more westernized parts of the Ukraine, including parts of Kiev, really had enough of being part of a Soviet-dominated area. Now, how do you resolve that? How do you take that forward? If you're part of that, how do you do it? There was an extraordinary moment when on BBC TV earlier today, when ordinary people went to see the president's residence and walked around these hundreds of hectares with their mouths open, saying, "My God, this is built on our backs. This is our money. This is our money that's built all this." And it was like the Russians in 1917 going into the palaces in St. Petersburg and Moscow and absolutely gobsmacked at what the leaders there, the people in charge, had done, what the dictatorships in charge had done. There is change to come, and we have to hope in the West that it's going to be friendly to us and that it's going to benefit the people. That's, I think, all we can really hope for, with our fingers crossed.
William, you spent time in the Ukraine between 2006 and 2009. Were you surprised to see the police turn on their own people?
I was surprised to see the police turn on their own people, although it was the special Berkut troops that were at fault here, that were firing at and indeed killing civilians, their brother Ukrainians. This is a surprise. The Ukrainians, in my experience, are not a violent people by any means, and they are also long-suffering people. But there were limits that they reached and they began to take matters into their hands, and they've succeeded in taking matters into their hands, so that part was not a surprise. It was good. It was good to see that kind of effect on the part of Ukrainians.
Do you think there will be more bloodshed to come?
I hope not. I think there's a way forward now without bloodshed. As we talked about earlier, the party of Viktor Yanukovych is now essentially disintegrating. Members of his party are leaving the party. His members of parliament in the Rada, in the parliament, are voting with the opposition overwhelmingly for the new constitution, for the new laws that allow Yulia Tymoshenko to leave prison without a record, without a criminal record whatsoever. They just eliminated the violation, eliminated the law that she was said that she violated. So the Party of Regions is now either walked away or has switched over to the opposition. So that suggests to me that real politics can take back over, and that violence is no longer necessary. Okay,
William, it's nice to talk to you, and thank you very much for spending the time with us tonight. Edwina and Sonia, let's turn to the Mail on Sunday tomorrow. Okay. Here we have the Shadow Floods Minister, Barry Gardiner, on holiday. The Mail portray it like this: basking in 85-degree Mexican sunshine as Britain counts the cost of the floods. Hard at work is the headline. Red Ed's Flood Supremo. Is this fair?
Do you know what my thought was, Stephen? They've got this on the front page and on 4 other pages. This is the Shadow from Bencher, and he's on holiday with his wife. And my thought was, we really ought to check out the Mail on Sunday. A little bit later on, it looks like a spoiler for a different story that they're trying to make sure they keep as an exclusive. That is not news. He is not an important person, and he's on holiday with his wife in parliamentary recess. So what?
Well, do you know, this might be the only time ever that I actually agree with Edwina Currie, because no, it's not news. It's a ridiculous front page, I have to say. But what it lends itself to is a discussion about the flooding. And I have to say that the one thing that has absolutely been constantly missing about discussions about flooding is about the issue of geo-engineering and weather manipulation. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
What?
Well, geo-engineering, are you not familiar with it, Edwina?
I'm not familiar with weather manipulation. My God, we have powers I didn't know about.
Really? Well, this is absolutely fantastic, because I might get to educate you. Our weather has been manipulated for at least 30 or 40 years. And in fact, if you go onto the BBC website, you will actually be able to find documentary evidence from people who have testified to being in charge of aircraft where our weather is manipulated. We know that this has been taking place. There's government documentation about it.
Now, let me just check. So you're saying there's a conspiracy for us to have bad weather?
Oh, who used the word conspiracy?
I'm just asking you.
I'm saying that there is a geo-engineering program that takes place that actually manipulates the weather.
But for what purposes?
Have you never been aware of that? I'm actually genuinely interested.
I thought it was God what did it.
Oh, no, actually, no. And for a number of purposes, actually. And one of them being that, obviously, if you can manipulate the weather, then you can manipulate the crops. And then you can actually determine, it's like sort of a future trading, a future forecast. You can then determine when the crops are going to be available and when certain crops aren't. So that's one purpose for it.
This is new to you, Edwina.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Well, I love that, because I do love being able to educate people, but I advise anybody out there, if suddenly the term geo-engineering...
Edwina doesn't believe you, Sonia.
I don't believe a scrap of it.
Well, no, of course, Edwina, I'm not surprised at all that you wouldn't, because...
No, I only did science at university, forgive me.
Well, and that's probably the problem, you see, because in order to... I went to university as well, I did psychology, but in order to be able to get through a science degree, you would have to subscribe to a very mainstream understanding about science, and it wouldn't necessarily encompass some of the most wonderful forward thinkers that we have around.
It was a long time ago.
Well, but all
I'm very glad.
Well, I'm asking you because I think you'd find it very interesting. The truth is there is a weather manipulation program that's taking place, has been for the last 40 years, and as I say, in all of the coverage about the floodings, it's been totally remiss.
Oh, I see. So in whose interest is it to have all these floods?
Well, in a number of people's interest. For example, what's going to happen in terms of the people's homes? What will happen with all of these floods?
And they will get repaired.
Well, but by whom?
by lots of people who do repairs of houses, mostly paid for by the insurance companies.
Well, the problem is a lot of the insurance companies are refusing to help.
You haven't answered my question. In whose interests are these? If somebody's manipulating the weather, they're doing it for a purpose.
Sure they are.
And if they're doing it for a purpose, I'd like to know what their purpose is.
Well, as I say, there's a number of purposes, including being able to forecast about crops.
But they can't. I mean, if that were the case, we wouldn't have rising food prices.
We wouldn't have rising food prices. But do you truly believe that the rising food prices are a knock-on effect of what exactly?
I mean, an intermix of supply and demand for food.
But you're accepting what you've been told, aren't you? And I'm not.
So yeah, absolutely. I believe it to be the case that if wheat prices are rising, it's a combination of rising numbers of people eating wheat, like in countries like China and in India, where it was rather less common, rising numbers, rising wealth. I think it's also because of the increasing use of biomass, which means that there's less land available for crop production.
Right.
And as a result, what do you think? It's more expensive to buy a loaf this year than it was a couple of years ago.
Well, you see, yes,
that seems to me an adequate explanation.
But it would seem to you an adequate explanation because I'm actually looking at an issue of, I believe truly, and it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy fact, because there's a vast amount of information to back this up.
Plenty of conspiracists out there.
I believe truly that there is a global agenda taking place, as I say, about a one world government.
Run by whom, please?
But look at the sort
Scare me, go on.
But look at the voice you're using.
Make me keep awake tonight so that I'm terrified.
It's not about fear politics,
Martians?
Edwina. No, that's just a ridiculous attitude, isn't it? It's not about fear politics. It's about the fact that it suits a certain percentage of people, an elite, for the world to be governed in a certain way and for people to follow a party line. They all went to where?
The LS, London School of Economics.
Yes, indeed. I can see that you don't believe me for a second. But you know what?
I went to maybe I'm one of them. Maybe Stephen's one of them. Maybe we're all in it together and you're the only one that's not admitted to it. What a load of baloney.
Oh, Edwina, do you know, I do feel sorry for you because you operate on such a surface level of understanding. You really do. And what you actually need to do is you need to get out beyond the sort of Westminster village, which even though you don't inhabit anymore, it still very much sort of permeates who you are and guides your understanding of the world. And it's a very narrow view of what is actually taking place.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
Good for you.
Please, Stephen, just keep her talking. It's wonderful.
I'm just sitting here thinking, how much are these two not gelling?
Well,
are you not even prepared to listen to what she's saying, Edwina, and contemplate that it might be true? No.
I'm not going to sleep tonight. I'm terrified.
I don't want to terrify you. What I want to do is...
You're not. I do reassure you. Now, look, if it were possible, I'm patronising. Of course, I'm really patronising.
Well, the problem is you can't patronise me because I don't see you as superior, so you're not able to patronise me. Don't be daft. Right, so...
There's a fact for you.
It is a fact. So what I would advise you to do, Edwina, because you really need to gen up on this, and that is when we finish talking tonight, please Google geo-engineering and expand that world vision of yours. It needs it.
And where have you genned yourself up in this, Sonia? Why have you taken an interest in this?
Well, a number of reasons, really, and that is I've interviewed a number of people on it, including a man called Max Bliss, who is extremely knowledgeable on the issue of weather manipulation. But there is actually government documentation going back some 30 years, which talks about the need for weather manipulation. It's perfectly, it's out there. It's not hidden. They're not hiding it away. And it is for a number of reasons, but not least. I mean, one of the reasons I'm very loath to say, because I think it is actually too much for Edwina to contemplate. But there is obviously an idea that if you block the sun's rays, then what you do, obviously, is you close off the pineal gland. And the pineal gland, for those who are more spiritually awake, is considered the sort of gateway to the soul and the gateway to the spirit, and it enables us to think above the flotsam and jetsam of life and not be bogged down by the sort of the nonsense that
can I just check, because I one of the things that I like to do, and I've done on my home
trying to check how we've got from the Mail on Sunday front page, hard at work, Redhead's Flood Supremo, to talking about the pineal gland.
Well, isn't it wonderful? And that is the beauty about the fact that we've all agreed on one thing, and that is the Mail on Sunday front page is absolute nonsense. Who cares whether this man's on holiday or not? I don't, and it's certainly not front page news.
Here's the news at 12:30. Now, Edwina Currie, the former Conservative MP, is with us tonight. The broadcaster Sonia Poulton is with us as well. I want to get your views on PMQs next, because the Labour leader Ed Miliband has said Prime Minister's questions subtracts from the reputation of politics, and he was looking to find ways to change it. Here's what he had to say to Chris Mason on Radio 4's World This Weekend, which will be broadcast tomorrow.
I don't think it adds to the reputation of politics. I think it subtracts from the reputation of politics. Now, I think lots of previous leaders, not just the Labour Party, but the Conservative Party would say that too. It's easy to say it's a problem, it's harder to change it, but I'm totally up for finding ways of changing it. You know, I try and ask the questions that I think the country wants asked, because I think I've got a unique ability to do that by being able to ask David Cameron 6 questions each Wednesday. But look, I know that people are put off by PMQs and the way it works, and I would be part of any endeavour to try and improve it.
Yeah, it's been suggested that you've been trying to tweak the tone of it, be a bit more consensual, mild-mannered, sombre, serious where appropriate. Is that something you are trying to do?
I think it was President Obama who said you can disagree without being disagreeable. And in a way, maybe that's a sort of lesson for Prime Minister's questions, but it's easier to state and harder to execute. The cauldron of the House of Commons is not conducive to the kind of atmosphere that invites. But look, we should always endeavour to do it. We should endeavour to, be proud of the show we put on for the country, not giving people a sense that, their kids behave better than we do.
David Cameron's talked in the past about ending Punch and Judy and then admitted that he couldn't do it, and it was back to as things were. I just wonder if in a few years' time you might reflect that you tried to change things but actually it was impossible.
Well, look, I think it's incredibly hard to change. I mean, it is incredibly hard to change. It's the oppositional nature of the House of Commons, which is one of the important things about the House of Commons, and the accountability of the Prime Minister to the House of Commons in Prime Minister's questions is really, really important, and I think is an essential part of our democracy for all its ills. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and change it. David Cameron said he wants to make it better. I said we want to make it better. We should at least try.
Sonia, is he right?
I really struggle with Ed Miliband. I so wanted to like him, Stephen, coming naturally from a sort of socialist background, but I don't trust him. And the truth is that the thing that people are most upset about is not anything to do with Punch and Judy politics. It's the fact that at PMQs, they have this cosy consensus. They already sort of pre-agree on what they're going to discuss. It's, within a certain remit. It doesn't represent the country, certainly not. And because the truth is that all of them, be it Labour, Liberal or Conservative, they're all having meetings with pretty much the same people who are determining the future of our country. All the sort of super companies, the Sercos, the G4Ss, they're all in the sort of pocket of them. So, no, he's not right, because the truth is it's all a bit of a show, really. It's a bit of a facade.
Edwina?
Well, Prime Minister's Question Time is very much of a show. It's the best piece of theatre that you get in politics today, and that's been true for a very long time. It's been true since it's been broadcast, 1986. And that's what it's intended to be. Where I would like to see some change, it's actually Ed Miliband takes up most of the half hour. I think he gets 6 questions, and that can take, if you think of 2-3 minutes for each question, that can take 18 to 20 minutes. It would be much better if we had more opportunity, I think, for backbenchers on both sides, who of course do not have to give notice of their question.
Right.
They put in an open question, and therefore it can be something that's actually come up in the news that day, an hour beforehand. If something's happened in your constituency, you go and have a word with the Speaker's office early in the morning, and you say, something terrible has happened in my patch, or something wonderful has happened in my patch. I'd like the opportunity to put it to the Prime Minister today. And if you're lucky, you may get called. So it's not scripted. It's not all planned beforehand. And many of the best questions, you actually watch PMQ to the end of the 30 minutes. Many of the best questions are asked by the backbenchers and are answered both with grace and with some wit, usually by the Prime Minister.
Now, do you think, Sonia, if it was all calmed down, the people would stop watching? And the people are engaging with PMQs, the viewing public, because it is dramatic and it is cheeky.
I've never known a time like this, Stephen, in terms of politics. I have to say, I find that the great British public are hugely disillusioned with politics. They see PMQs as nothing but, theatre. I agree. I think actually some of the best questions do come from the backbenchers. I'm really not interested in the sort of PR scripted words of Miliband or Cameron anymore, because I simply don't trust them. I believe that they're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Sonia, can I ask you something? Have you stood for Parliament?
Oh, no, goodness,
Why
no.
not?
I'll tell you why, because the problem about Parliament, Edwina, is it's full of politicians and I can't stand them.
Well, yeah, but you'd be better. You would be much better at it, Sonia. And you could stand for Parliament and stand in an area where perhaps a proportion of people might agree with you, get yourself elected. Glenda Jackson did, for example, and you may find that you're then able to make your point of view heard in Parliament as effectively as any of the other 600 odd.
She's trying to say, Sonia, you couldn't hack it, you couldn't make it, and therefore stop slagging them off, because at least they've had the guts to stand up and be counted.
Well, I don't believe they have had the guts. I think that most politicians have had nothing but a free ride, actually, in truth. I don't believe...
Try it. Try it and see,
I'll tell
darling.
you why. I'll tell you why. Please don't call me darling. It's ridiculous.
Why not?
Well, look, because you and I are not darling to each other. It's false. It's theatrical. You don't need it, Edwina.
I'm very theatrical.
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
merely saying to you, stand for Parliament. See how you get on.
And what I'm saying
it's
to you
not a
is...
free ride.
What I'm saying to you is I don't believe politics is not the solution to our woes, Edwina. Politics is what's got us into this mess.
No. Politics is going to be the solution.
Absolutely
Let me tell you something.
not.
Sooner or later, it comes back to the House of Commons. It comes back to voting in the House of Commons. It comes back to voting for the people in the House. Well, there isn't a better system.
Only a political animal would say that. The truth is what we actually need is a true revolution, and I mean a true revolution. I don't mean a bloodbath on the streets.
You mean one without a democracy?
What we need, we're not in a democracy, Edwina. You only have to look at some of the laws that have recently been pushed through very quietly, including the gagging law, which means that a year in the run-up to an election, people are not allowed to protest. That does not make us a democracy anymore, and it's a fallacy to suggest we are. And only a politician would suggest that we are. Politics is not the solution.
We are a democracy. You do not have to protest. You're on the radio live right now. We're all listening to what you have to say. So stand up and try putting it to the people. Try getting people to vote for you. See how far you get, Sonia.
You're missing my point. My point is that politics is not the solution. Politics is the problem.
You've just said that once already. It doesn't make it any truer.
Politics creates people like Edwina Currie. And that is the problem with the world, okay? Is because you sit there in your ivory towers completely
I'm not in an ivory tower. I'm in a little cottage in the Peak
with
District.
the man and woman on the street who are going through absolute hell as a consequence of the heinous measures that are conducted there at the House of Commons, barely opposed by a so-called opposition. So they are all in it together. That's what we need to expose.
Sonia, get in there and say so.
I don't
get
want
yourself
to.
elected.
I loathe politics.
Well, then don't be.
If you don't listen, my point.
Do you vote, Sonia?
I did, and I won't anymore.
If you don't vote, don't moan.
That's not true. Of course I'll moan. I'll absolutely moan.
Because if you don't vote, you'll end up with a government you don't like.
No, this is what happens, OK, is if I vote, which I would normally vote Labour, but if I
I'm so glad to hear you don't vote. It's wonderful.
I'll tell you why.
No,
because any of them, voting for any of them is like saying, well, you don't abuse me as much as the last one, so I'm going to bring you in. The truth is they are all as bad as each other. We've seen that with the fact
that it's not so.
Yes, of course it's so.
But not voting.
The fact that Nick Clegg would dare to say that the archbishops were over-exaggerating about the issue of food banks and hunger in this country shows you that they are all in it together.
Well, Edwina probably agrees with them.
Well, if you want us to get onto food banks, we need another couple of hours, please, Stephen.
But do you agree with Nick Clegg?
It's not that. The issue of food banks is more complex than one can just reduce to a single soundbite. And I'm more than happy to talk about that. It's not actually in the newspapers at all tonight.
No, it's not.
It should be, because there's a 400% rise in the use of food banks in the last 2 years, and it's absolutely obscene. The starvation of a nation is planned, has to be.
Okay.
And it is directly linked to the policies that take place in the House of Commons.
I want to come back to PMQs and just let you have a flavour of what it's like in there.
OK.
First of all, let me just go back to the very important issue of flooding. I want to...
Order! People getting very excited on both sides of the House. The question has been put. The answer must be heard.
Given the huge success of the University Technical College Initiative, creating over 25, will the Prime Minister please confirm he will support a further round of applications this autumn and that funding is available so that businesses, universities, parents and young people in Devon...
I do think...
Order! Mr. Ruane, you are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man. Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Carers Week. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to...
Order! If the session has to be extended to accommodate the democratic rights of members, it will be extended. The honourable gentleman will, I repeat, will be heard. Dr. Huppert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Carers Week.
I do have to say, a picture tells 1,000 words. This is the Prime Minister who said...
Order, I apologise for having to interrupt again. Members, calm yourselves. It is only just after midday. Many hours of the day remain. Don't destroy your systems by exploding.
He's no longer an MP because he lost the election, I'm afraid, because of a Conservative candidate. But he's now a GP. He says, hold on. Calm down, dear. Calm down. Listen to the doctor. Calm down and listen to the doctor.
Love it.
I mean, what an appalling influence they are. They want children in classrooms to behave with restraint, and they behave like that. It's absolutely disgraceful.
I tell you what, Sonia, it used to be worse, because these days it's on at 12 noon, and it used to be on at 2:30 after lunch, and it was just louder.
Do you not think, Sonia, that's really kind of entertaining? I was laughing during it.
Well, the problem is, I'd think it was entertaining if 10,600 people hadn't died as a consequence of some of their austerity measures just a couple of years ago. No, it's no good you sighing, Edwina. This is the real world. Like I say, you come from an ivory tower where you can...
I come from Liverpool. We don't have ivory towers in Liverpool.
I'm talking about being an MP. The truth is, when you're an MP, you get subsidised restaurants, you get food paid for you. Why on earth are we paying for MPs' foods? Everybody else has to pay for their own foods. So it is an ivory tower existence. Second home allowances, they can't relate to what's going on the street. So it's no good you going, when I talk about people who have died as a consequence of the heinous measures that are taking place in that parliament. Well, they're all having a little laugh about it. They need a good box as far as I'm concerned, Stephen.
The extreme and humorless approach that Sonia's taking actually destroys some serious points that should be made about how our country takes itself to prosperity. And in the end, that's disappointing. I would hope that we would have proper discussions about these issues, about how you alleviate poverty, about how you get people off benefits and into work, about how you cut the deficit, about how as a country we can pay our way in future. These are big and important issues. They do get debated in Parliament, but they're debated quietly in Parliament and nobody takes any notice.
They're being debated on a lie. The truth is that this whole idea of a deficit half the time is an absolute scandalous lie. They take from the bottom of the hierarchy instead of focusing on the top at some of the biggest sponges in the system, including royalty and parliamentarians and bankers. So the truth is that the real issues are not being debated, Edwina. I've seen enough of your debates.
How do you know? When did you last go to Parliament?
Well, I as a journalist, I've been frequently.
Well, let's move on to the next story. Front page Sunday Times. Don't cry for me, David Cameron. Have you seen this? Sir Tim Rice, former Tory donor, has become the most high-profile figure to give his financial backing to UKIP. The party's treasurer has disclosed. Rice, who was awarded the knighthood under the government of John Major, I'm reading from the Sunday Times, believes Britain should be free from Europe and is intrigued by UKIP's rising popularity. So he's jumped, Edwina.
He's jumping on a little bandwagon and it's rolling in the wrong direction. If he seriously thinks that we should come out of the EU, I would disagree with him. I'd be happy to debate with him. You should have him on one night, perhaps, Stephen. And I'm not going to say anything abusive about him. He's a very remarkable man. But you could line up any number of celebrities supporting the Labour Party, supporting the Conservatives, supporting the Democratic Unionists, supporting the Greens, whatever. That's not my kind of politics. My kind of politics is about millions of people voting in elections. And I wish Sir Tim Ryan well, but I'm not going to start writing musicals. So I think he should be a bit careful, perhaps, about getting himself involved like this.
Well, I mean, Stephen, you already have a fair measure of what I think about politics, and UKIP to me is just several stones throw away from the BNP, frankly, and I know that they will object highly to that description, but let them. I'm more than happy to debate that with Farage. But, you know, the truth is that I just look at this with disdain, really, because it's just more of the same, isn't it, really? I think there's a great discussion to be had about whether we should or shouldn't be part of the EU. But what they do is they mix it up with such horrible racism and bigotry that I just find it absolutely repugnant. And so as far as I'm concerned, anybody getting behind UKIP, well, they just need a damn good talking to, frankly.
Let's move on to the next story. Who wants to choose it?
Yes, I will, actually. I'd like to talk about the surveillance and the snooping, which if I can find it, because it's on the front
page Sunday Telegraph,
yes.
Inquiry into phone and email snoopers.
Yeah, now this is really interesting because obviously this is very much about our big brother state, about the kind of surveillance society that we're in. You know, 800 public bodies are now currently allowed, they have power to snoop on our phone and private correspondence. And what this story in the Sunday Telegraph is saying is that intelligence and law enforcement agencies are facing an investigation into the fact that they are perhaps allowing too many people to access these records. And that is unquestionably the truth. There is no doubt about it at all. Do you know that most council officials can snoop on you at the drop of a hat? They can listen into your phone conversations, they can look at your emails, and it's completely unacceptable. To what end?
They're very welcome to listen in on mine. I don't mind at all. I mean, we have something called the Interception of Communications Commissioner. We do actually have a gentleman, called Sir Anthony May. It's about time they appointed some more women to these jobs. He has a team of 8 full-time inspectors with powers to examine the work of MI5 and MI6, etc. Most of the time, I would rather we have effective MI5, MI6 and police chasing criminals, putting terrorists under surveillance, keeping us all safe. You know, I'm married to a former Metropolitan Police officer and follow these things with some interest and close interest. And there are so many plots that do not result in death on the streets in this country. And one of the reasons is because intercepts are being used. In that respect, I'm perfectly happy. They can have all my medical records, you know, all the row about GPs' medical records and so on. Please have them. If it helps somebody else, I'm really pleased that you should have my data.
Who's it going to help?
Well, at the moment, all the hospital data is anonymised and then collected and then analysed, which is how we get to know so much about whether surgery is working, whether doctors are competent, or occasionally pinpointing the one or two who are not. It's not done at the moment for GP data, and it should be. And there's quite a discussion going on about that. You're welcome to it. Please have it with joy. Enjoy. Make the most of it. You can have every bit of information about me. If it helps somebody else, if it helps keep our country free, I'm delighted.
But that's where people go wrong. They make this assumption that if they've got nothing to hide, then they should be, you know, it's okay, snoop on me. No, don't snoop on me. What MI5 and what MI6 need to start actually doing is A, being more accountable for their actions, B, stop covering up what's actually taking place in Parliament.
They're secret services.
Yeah,
that's what they're supposed to do.
Secret services who have routinely and repeatedly hidden various things that have taken place in Parliament, including various paedophile rings that have taken place. You know this, Edwina. I don't need to tell you this. You know, so these things...
What are you accusing me of, Sonia?
Who's accusing you of anything? Do you know what, Edwina?
I've never hidden anything.
She's not accusing you.
I'm not accusing you of anything, Edwina, but I do remember a really interesting tweet that you tweeted.
Do you know what? We're not going to start talking about paedophile rings on this programme. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about here.
All right. Well, all I'm saying, OK, do you know what, Stephen? I sincerely hope, as I say, Edwina, I am desperate to have that conversation with you about paedophile rings. So please agree to that interview with me so that we can get this out into the open. We don't have to take it onto the Stephen Nolan Show.
I will when you stand for Parliament.
Oh, I've got to stand for Parliament before I can actually ask you about things you said.
We are not going to start talking about that. We're talking about this story, front page Sunday Telegraph, and Edwina is saying that she doesn't mind people snooping on her phone calls and her emails because she's got nothing to hide.
Yes,
Edwina, on the medical story, of course, that policy has been suspended now. That was a policy which people had to opt out if they did not want their medical records to be shared, for example, with insurance companies.
Well, yes.
So it wasn't with universities.
Exactly.
It could have been shared with insurance companies.
No, but that's the whole point. The information that is to be developed and be analysed, and which I think will be extremely useful. For example, it will find out, what are the delays in getting cancer patients from the GP to the hospital. That we've got all the hospital data on that, and we know how that delay is linked with cancer mortality rates and all our efforts to help people with cancer and so on. That's not available at the moment from the GPs. It isn't my personal details. I don't lie to insurance companies. I have asthma. It goes down on the paper. I had this operation. I've had that surgery. It goes down on any application. It's nuts. It's crazy to lie to insurance companies, because you know what? If they find out, you are not insured. You've paid all that money. You've got no insurance. So don't tell lies to them. And in that respect, I'm more than happy for them to have any information from me personally, and I give it to them. When it comes to large-scale epidemiological research, you're looking for millions and millions and millions of records, and they are anonymised. That's the whole point.
We need to know,
can't be traced back to an individual.
What are they going to do with those records? Who has access to those records? Because the truth is what we will...
Of course we do.
Yes, but what we will eventually find, for example, with the NHS data records, what we will eventually find is that people will be determined about whether they can have treatment depending on their lifestyle. That will happen. You know it as well as I do, because we are already 49% privatised in the NHS, and that is increasing on an exponential scale. So that's what will happen. Our personal records will be used against us, and that is completely inappropriate. And I absolutely welcome this.
To come back to the story in the front page of the paper, are you surprised with the volume of requests there were last year? 500,000, half a million requests. To access information.
It depends how those requests
sounds a lot, doesn't it?
But it depends, I think, a little bit how those requests are numbered. I mean, if it's a single request for a single person on a single day, then you'd run up the numbers very, very quickly. We had all the tragedy of the killing of drummer Lee Rigby, for example, last year. We had other potential atrocities and a great deal of movement between countries like Kenya, where there were problems, and Pakistan and so on. There's a lot of chasing up of people, and the budget, remember, for watching terrorists or potential terrorists has been substantially increased. So that could be where that's coming from. It's entirely right and proper in a free society to ask, why do you need all these phone taps? What are you up to? Why do you need to do all this? Can't you do it in some other way? But any police officer will tell you that actually what you need to do is listen in on a conversation and then act on what you hear.
I mean, the thing is, Stephen, what we need to do now is who's watching the watchers. We're being watched constantly, but, everybody likes to talk about terrorists here and terrorists there. Some of the biggest terrorists are running the countries. So
that is rubbish.
Oh, you can say that, Edwina.
I do say it.
Sonia, you can't say that about
United
Kingdom.
But one man's terrorist.
Come on, Sonia, that's an outrageous thing to say.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
In
that is the reality.
It's an outrageous thing to say,
please do me a favour.
These are elected representatives who have a mandate.
There is a difference, Sonia.
Police are protecting corporate interests. You only have to go to Barton Moss, where they're being fracked the hell.
And I tell you what,
and the police are there protecting corporate interests, just as they were when I was at a protest on Wednesday do with ATOS.
The quicker they get fracking in Barton Moss, I've said, if you want to frack in my back garden, you're very, very welcome.
What a great idea.
I tell you what, Sonia, if you got mugged on the way home tonight, the first person you call be the police.
This is not an anti-police rant. This is about the fact that we are being snooped on exponentially, and it has to stop.
Out of time. You two have done my head in tonight.
Good.
Thank you, Sonia.
Take care.
Thank you, Edwina.
Cheers.
I'm going to bed.